They say if you live one place long enough, you are that place. My name is Anthony Desiato, and I've lived in Westchester, New York my entire life. This season, I'll be telling my county's story through her comic shops, capturing a microcosm of the comics industry during the pivotal 1990s. Alternate Realities was and always will be my comic shop, but it's time to revisit my first shops, the quintessential stores of the area and the era that are now no more. Everything comes full circle this season with the final piece of my comic shop history. Welcome to My Comic Shop History. I am your host, Anthony Desiato. My county's comic shop history continues with another shop from White Plains, a long-standing institution, Comic Book Heaven. And I'm very excited to welcome to the show for the first time former Comic Book Heaven customer and employee, Saad Siddiqui.
How you doing, Anthony?
Doing well. Thanks for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
So we started with Heroes World, and we're staying in White Plains to talk about Comic Book Heaven. Before we get into it, your presence here represents a blending of the worlds for me here, because you and I met at Alternate Realities, where you started shopping after Comic Book Heaven closed.
Yep.
But we also both attended Pace Law School at separate times.
Yes.
But so this is a rare instance where I have someone from, sort of both worlds, both the comic side and the law side. We haven't had that on the show before.
Yeah. Look, I encountered that every once in a while. Like, I remember when I'd go to Comic Book Heaven, back when I was in school, and randomly see a classmate. I'm like, okay, this is, as George Costanza would say, it's a mixing of the circles.
Yeah.
Okay. Had to just kind of brace myself every time that would happen. So I'm glad it pleases me to be the first.
Yeah, no, I like it a lot. So before we sat down to record, you told me a few things about Comic Book Heaven and your experience there. You told me that you shopped there from when it opened in 94 to when it closed in 2013, that the folks there, particularly the owners, Morris and Irene, were like family. And you worked there during high school and college. So basically, what Comic Book Heaven was to you and what you were to it very much mirrors the relationship I had with Alternate Reality. So I'm very excited to compare notes about all of this.
Yeah, it's funny. So there was a comic book shop in White Plains in 1993 called 1 Million Comics. And they were over on Mamaroneck Avenue between... right by the split between Old Mamaroneck Road and Mamaroneck Avenue on that side of town. So they were there for about a year.
I lived there for a brief period.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I had an apartment on at 2 Old Mamaroneck Road for a couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is right at that split on Mamaroneck Avenue.
Gotcha.
And so, when I moved to White Plains in January of '93, I came upon that place, and it was owned by two brothers, Felix and Oscar, and they wound up. I wound up getting the sad news in December of '93 that they were shutting down the store. So I'm going, wow, what am I going to do? And then one, fine day, it's early January of '94. I happen to be walking on Main Street, and I see a gentleman standing outside, smoking a cigarette. And he was a big, heavy-set guy. And I looked, he's in the doorway of a storefront. And I happen to walk past, and I see like comic book art, but it's not up. And I said, is this a comic book shop? And he said, yeah, we just getting opened up, but you're welcome to come in. And that was Morris. And so the location was 205 Main Street. And back then, they didn't even have a sign up, but they were going to call it Comic Book Alley. So it was Franklin Art Comic Book Alley. And that's the first time I walked into the store. And it was a Saturday, and I could see that they were still setting everything up, but it was interesting because his main focus at the time was he wanted to really showcase comic book art. And he said, the next couple of months it's going to get set up. And so I started coming back there. Every weekend I'd pop in, every Saturday, and then it really started to get hustle and bustle. And then next thing you know, by the late spring, as we were going into summer, I started working there.
So the original location was on Main Street.
Yep.
What occupies that space now? Because I'm trying to place it.
Ritz-Carlton. They tore the entire thing down. It's now the Ritz-Carlton. So, yeah. And so, where that strip of White Plains is, the Ritz-Carlton. I mean, what used to be there were several storefronts. And so Comic Book Heaven was 205 Main Street. I think right now where the actual entrance to Comic Book Heaven is, you'll see the entrance to BLT Steakhouse Restaurant.
We're big fans of BLT.
Hey, I love the steak. I mean, I'm not going to knock it, but Comic Book Heaven, then it was Comic Book Alley. It was there from January of 1994 to January of 1997. So what wound up happening was that lease, they wound up, running out on the lease, and they were thinking about what they were going to do. The landlord raised the rent. And so that's when they moved to the Court Street location.
And that's the one that I knew. So by the time I started shopping there, they had already moved. And, we'll get to this later in the episode, but I never made it to the White Plains Mall location, their final destination. But the Court Street location, that was the one that I would go to. So I was only ever a regular at 3 shops. Heroes World was where I started. Then after Heroes World closed, I had a pull list at Alternate Realities for a time. I kind of bounced back and forth a little bit. So it was AR, then 1 If By Cards, 2 If By Comics, because I had a period where I was really into basketball cards.
Mark
and Donna.
Yeah, Mark and Donna.
They'll be on the show later this season. Mm-hmm. And then I came back to Alternate Realities. So this was, probably late elementary school where I came back to AR. And then once I started working there in high school, that was it. But along the way, I would go to Dragon's Den and I would go to Comic Book Heaven, on a more casual basis, pop in every now and then. And specifically in the case of Comic Book Heaven, when I needed a back issue.
Yes. Trust me, I spent many a day filing away those books and alphabetizing them.
Yeah, so I'm fascinated by the back issue operation there because, and again, as a kid in the 90s, this was before, maybe Mile High Comics had their website up. I don't know, but it certainly wasn't anything that I discovered until later. So, if you wanted to get back issues, and I wasn't going to conventions or anything like that. So it was like, I knew if I needed something, I could go to Comic Book Heaven.
Exactly.
I knew I would pay for it.
Yes.
But they had everything. And, I don't think we've mentioned him yet specifically, but Bishop,
yes,
the manager. So I would go into Comic Book Heaven with my list of what I was looking for. Probably the biggest back issue project that I ever embarked upon was, you'll laugh, tracking down the entire Spider-Man clone saga.
Oh, wow.
So, again, I know it's not the most revered story of all time, but it's what got me into Spider-Man. And I was so curious about this story. And I will say, reading it after the fact and knowing where it was going to go, I think made for a better experience. I'm sure people who were reading it as it came out felt otherwise.
Yeah, I would agree with that latter part because I read it as it was coming out. Just as a quick interruption, at one point midway through the storyline, I literally had about, because I think it was 50 books by when all was said and done. So somewhere around comic book issue 30 of that entire saga, I actually went to Morris because I was an employee then, but I'd also have my own file. And I said to him, can I trade these in? And I kid you not, I traded every single one of them in. Just, I couldn't do it anymore. I was protesting Spider-Man because of that storyline.
I hear you. But for me, it holds a special place. And so I tracked down that entire 2-year storyline as back issues. And I remember going to Comic Book Heaven. I think I hit probably all the shops in Westchester, my main shops in Westchester. I hit all of them, tracking down those back issues. And I remember going into Comic Book Heaven with my list, and I would hand it to Bishop, and he would go into that back room. And, I never really ventured that far back, but, you could see certainly all the steel shelves, right? And then he would emerge with
wood. They were all wood.
Oh, they were wood.
All wood.
Wow. Okay.
Every single one of them were
Gotcha.
wood.
But he would emerge with whatever he had, which was usually most of what was on the list. Occasionally he wouldn't have something, but he usually did. And then he would sit down with the price guide and look up each comic and mark next to the issue how much it was going to cost. We came up with the term for this, the Bishop tax. So again, it was a sort of thing where you knew Comic Book Heaven would likely have it. You'd pay a little extra for it, but you'd get what you need. So those are really my most defining Comic Book Heaven memories, going to get back issues from Bishop.
Well, it's funny, just even so the back issue operation. And again, this actually goes back to 94 before Bishop even got there. I think it was something that kind of the Morris fell into. So initially, obviously, the focus was the artwork, and he wanted to make sure that he carried as diverse of an inventory as possible. This was also during the mid-90s. So the back, the fad of comic book collecting was very big. The alternative covers, you know, Lady Death was a book that came out by Chaos Comics in 1994. So he'd carried a couple issues. Next thing you know, it hit it big, or She, The Way of the Warrior. So it was trying to build up a back issues for like those Image books, those, you know, books that often tended to sell out. And then from there, you know, we were just ordering heavy numbers. I mean, I think to a certain extent, it kind of got really crazy when, you know, I'm filing away 100 copies of each chapter of The Chaos Effect by Valiant Comics. And I kid you not, the VP at the time for marketing was a guy named Steve Mazarski. And he calls up Morris and he says, Valiant's doing this big crossover called The Chaos Effect. And next thing you know, Morris ordered 100 copies of each issue. I mean, you know it's bad when you're looking at a book called Secret Weapons 8 and we have 120 copies.
So that's something actually that I was curious about, whether the store ordered specifically with an eye toward having leftovers for the back issue
For
stock.
some of, you know, I think with the Chaos Effect, the hope was just that it would be a big seller because by 93, 94, you know, certain books were selling 90,000 copies a month. Now, granted, it was the retailers that were buying them, but you know, people were spending so much money buying comic books, hoping to duplicate the collectability of like another Death of Superman, or hitting it big with, you know, getting that Magnus Robot Fighter 12, the first appearance of Turok, because in the early 90s when Valiant hit it big, those original runs of Valiant books were sought after collector's items. So those were the kinds of back issues that people were looking for. So what Morris, I think, started to do was he was definitely, as you said, looking to order books, making sure that we would always have 5 or 10 left over for back issues. And in some books, you would order more, heavier, like if it was a number 1, for instance. And back then, there was a number 1 every month. 0 Hour with all the Zero issues. I mean, forget about it. And I used to have nightmares about this stuff because I'd be the one filing it away.
I should probably save this for when we do the Dragon's Den episodes, but it's on my mind now. So, because you mentioned Heroes 0 Hour, if you remember during that storyline, they had their gimmick was at the end of each of the issues,
the fade out,
the fade to white.
Yeah,
and again, a little kid, I remember getting one of the Superman issues, I think at Dragon's Den. And I didn't know what was going on. And my mom and I went back to the store. We thought it was a printing defect. Did you find, did any other customer, was I the only one? Or
No. I could guarantee you, I'm sure there were a couple of people that felt gypped because there were at least 2 pages, you know, for each of those books that were, you know, they didn't have to do anything because they were just blank pages.
Yeah. So that was funny. But, and then I guess the other thing that I always wondered about, again, so there were some back issues, if I remember correctly, that were out on the floor.
Yes.
But the majority of the back issues were in that back room. And I guess that's kind of unusual. I mean, I know some stores, like if they have like their very high-end CGC books, those will be, you know, on a wall or in a separate room.
And you had that there too. I mean, you had like on the wall, you had the Silver Age stuff.
Right. But like all the regular back issues, again, were in that back room. What was the reasoning for that?
Well, it's just, so what would happen is what was on the floor was just a small a small sampling, if you will. And typically what you would do on the floor is have maybe a couple of back issues, like let's say try and get a run of Flashes out. Let's say on the floor you have a run going back 60 issues and you have 1 or 2 copies in the bin. But in the back, you actually had another 5 or 10 copies of each issue. So the idea was to replenish the floor back issue shelves or slots and keep the surplus in the back. And like there were tons and tons and tons of books in the back. So I remember going into the back of Alternate Realities, on those shelves, yes, you had back issues, but you also had Steve had, I couldn't believe how many statues he had on there.
Yeah, that back room was mostly statues.
Yeah, it was statues.
And a lot of trade paperback overstock as well.
Whereas, the back room, no matter which store it was, well, until it got to the White Plains Mall. But at the Court Street location, one of the things that made the Court Street location so appealing for Morris was he said that back room was perfect for the amount of back issues he wanted to carry. So when you go back to the Main Street location, when they first opened up that first summer, they had like this entire back area that's about the size of your apartment, right? But you only had shelves, when I started there, taking up about a third of it. So they had to hire a contractor, and those shelves were custom made. So they would come in and, get the fresh plywood, get it all, and then build it from scratch. So they must have had a contractor come in not once, not twice, but twice in the Main Street location, where to the point where by the time they moved out of that location in December of 96, January of 97, literally it was wall-to-wall shelves. Then they move into the location in January of 97 in Court Street. They had that same contractor come back and make the back wall-to-wall shelves. I remember, the effort to move the store, it was, Bishop, Morris, Irene. I was home from winter break in college. I'm helping them move. And at the time, I was more customer than employee. I was in college. It was pretty much all the customers who were like file customers who loved the place were helping the move happen. Right. And
that was very much, and I know you got a taste of that, but, very much, that alternate realities. On a regular basis, and especially, and we've discussed this, when the time came for the final move out, everybody, lent a hand. It was a cool thing to see.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I remember the first time I walked into the back of the Court Street location, and, Bishop was putting the boxes away, and Morris is all happy. He's like, yes, we have all this extra space. And Bishop is looking at me. He goes, he's going to fill that in like the next 2 months, right? I said, you're 100% right. He's going to have that all like just stacked up and blocked off. Absolutely.
So, I definitely want to speak more about Bishop, but Morris and Irene, I met Irene. I remember she would be behind the counter, and, I had very pleasant interactions with her. I don't believe I ever met Morris, but they were a husband and wife team.
Yep.
Who owned the store, which is really nice. And Irene, of course, sadly passed away a few years ago. Morris had predeceased her by a good few years as well.
Morris died. He died in September of 1998.
Okay.
And Irene died by March of 2007. February of 2017. Both passed away from cancer. With Morris, he died of a brain tumor, and it was very sad. They were a very interesting couple.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more. In reading her obituary, it mentioned that they had a number of businesses that they ran together. Yes. They had a newspaper and gift shop. They had a kosher deli for a while.
Yeah, so they had a kosher deli and catering service. Well, it was interesting because, I met them, obviously, they're running a comic book shop. And, they lived in an apartment on Bronx River Road, technically Bronxville, PO, but, Yonkers. And it was, in fact, right off of the Cross County, Bronx River Road, like near a 7-Eleven. I don't know, very close to Dragon's Den.
Okay.
And the Cross County Mall.
Sure.
So, and their apartment was wall-to-wall comic books because of all the overstock. And it's funny because Irene actually hadn't read comic books until they opened up the store. And so, they'd been together forever, loved each other very much, complimented each other very, very well. Morris could be very gruff, but at the same time, Irene was the person that kept him organized. And he could get easily excited, drive her crazy, drive me crazy, drive Bishop crazy. But then, of course, Irene was, more of the ACD, anal retentive one about certain things. And as a result, drive Morris crazy, drive Bishop crazy, drive me crazy too. But, they definitely made the store work by virtue of, their own personalities. Like Morris could, go back to all the artwork and the stories, and that was his thing. Whereas Irene was so new to comic books when the store opened up, and so she actually would spend the running joke was that anytime a new book would come out and it was a title Irene was interested in, you had to make sure you ordered an extra copy for Irene. Like, it would be hilarious. She'd actually hold on to the books and not want to sell it until she had a chance to read it. Whether if it was a title she was interested in. And we're talking about like Justice Society of America. Some of the certain Superman stories, the Catwoman run by Jim Ballant, like she loved that run. At the time it was 1994, so we're talking about like post Nightfall. So it would have been Nightfall, Night Quest, Night's End, The Return of Bruce Wayne, like that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
So who typically would handle the ordering? Would they do that, or would Bishop do that?
So Bishop didn't come until 1995.
Right.
So, they would do that. And sometimes I'd even do it with them where, so they'd get previews, right? And I'd even get a copy, and sometimes I'd have a homework assignment, take a look at it. What do you think? What do you like? Ask my opinion. But ultimately, they were the ones doing the ordering. And like anything else, you're going back, you're seeing how much of a book you've been ordering the last couple of months, how many have sold, how many do we have left, and based on that, you're adjusting the order, increasing or decreasing. When Bishop started there, it was summer of 95. So it was by, May of 95. And, he, at the time, I remember the first time I met him. I mean, he really just looked like the way the character Bishop was drawn in comic books back then. He had the mullet and everything.
Yeah, I mean, he really did bear a resemblance to
no
character.
question. No question.
So Bishop, of course, is not his birth name. Did he legally change it?
No.
He didn't legally change it. I thought he did. Okay, urban legend, I guess.
It was an urban legend. He did not change it. Back then, when first time I met Bishop, in the first couple of months, the first few weeks, it was, Bishop, he's essentially going to be the manager. And I worked with a good guy, always got along.
Yeah.
And at the time, really, where Bishop's focus was, so one of the things that was going on in the store was there was a high turnover with the framing, with the framers, and I'd say Bishop brought the stability to the store.
Where did he come from? What had he been doing prior?
I think he actually at one point had come from like Dragon's Den.
Oh, okay.
If I remember correctly, and I could be wrong about this.
He was always kind of a curious figure to me. And when you talk about Westchester's comic shop history, he's a figure who looms large over it.
Well, absolutely.
Do you keep in touch?
Yeah. We randomly, we haven't touched base in a while, but, especially after the store closed, as a friend, absolutely. Bishop was invited to my wedding. Granted, he got the dates confused and he showed up on the wrong night. It's literally my favorite story. I got married on Friday, November 6, 2009. So literally, and my wife cracked up because when we were sending out the invitations, I actually sent the invitation to the comic book shop. And I sent it to Irene, I sent it to Ricky, and I sent it to Bishop. So Ricky and Irene couldn't make it, but Bishop had RSVP'd yes. So, my wedding day comes, and I'm getting married, and it's New Rochelle, and it was funny because my wife, Sam, even said, like, okay, I love the fact that Bishop RSVP'd. Who are we sitting him with? Because Irene and Ricky aren't coming. So wedding night comes, we're looking around at the dinner, no Bishop, no date. I'm like, dude, what happened? And so, the next day, obviously, I didn't think to call. So that Sunday, Sam and I are literally at LaGuardia Airport, about to get on a plane to fly to Canada. We were flying out to Niagara Falls for a little mini-moon. Mm-hmm. And I get a call from Bishop. And he goes, dude, I am so sorry. What? I went to the wedding we thought it was last night. And we showed up. We were all dressed up. And I kid you not, Bishop and his date showed up, and it must have been like, it was not the Siddiqui Schwartz wedding he showed up to. I think it was something like, the Castellano wedding.
Right.
So all of a sudden he said, yeah, we showed up in let's just say me and my date stood out. It was like that scene from Animal House when they walk into the bar and the record skips. Zip.
For anyone listening who hasn't been married, when someone doesn't show up the day of, it's not the best.
Yes, exactly.
It's not the best. I'm curious though. What did it say on the place card? What? It
Bishop.
Bishop.
It actually said Bishop +1. That's exact.
Not even his last name, Purvis, just Bishop.
I just put Bishop.
Just Bishop.
Bishop. And Sam cracked up. She said, I joked. She said, well, what's his real name? And, Keith Purvis. And she's like, no, just go with Bishop.
So when he and so again, you predated him at the store. When he came in, from Dragon's Den to be the manager of Comic Book Heaven, he was already Bishop at that point?
Yeah, he was already Bishop.
He just introduced himself as Bishop.
That's how it was. In fact, I think I worked with him for about a good 4 years before I learned his real name. I don't think I learned. So I met him in 95. I don't think I learned his name until 1999.
You've probably seen it. It's on YouTube. Someone did a little mini documentary about Comic Book Heaven when it was in the mall location. Have you seen it? And he talks about how only 3 people are allowed to call him by his birth name.
Yes.
Like his mother, his ex-wife, and I forgot the third. Was it a child? Or?
I think it's a child.
Oh, no, bill collectors.
Yes.
That's what it was. Was the name, was that a thing at the store?
You just knew not to call him by any other name other than Bishop. That was definitely a boundary.
I mean, how did customers approach it, I guess? Or was it just accepted? If you were like, oh, that's Bishop, they go, okay.
No, well, that's it. You didn't think anything of it. And, it's funny because, I loved working with Bishop. And I could tell that, and Bishop definitely has a way about him.
What is that way?
I'll say this. He's very unapologetic about who he is. He's very straightforward, and he can have a very deadpan sense of humor. And I think some people, if you can appreciate a deadpan sense of humor, you're going to love him. And if you don't like deadpan sense of humors, yeah, you might have a tough time with Bishop. But, part of it also is, I think, so for the people who are shopping at the mall location, they kind of, may have a different view on it because I actually saw the entire evolution of, between the stores when it went from Comic Book Alley to Comic Book Heaven. Part of it also is Bishop's role changed over the years because, when he started, you had Morris.
Mm-hmm.
And effectively, Morris ran everything and Irene kept them organized. And, Bishop was there initially because one of the reasons that Morris brought Bishop in is Bishop did the gaming. So the goal was to expand that aspect of the business and let Bishop spearhead that.
Okay.
Because he had a following, and if I remember correctly, it was from Dragon's Den, bringing in the gaming. I mean, even after, what was it, the store in Mamaroneck that Bishop...
Modern Myths?
Yeah, even after Modern Myths closed, I mean, Bishop ultimately, again, he's now working in a store where his focus, again, is the gaming. It's not
Gamer's Gauntlet.
Yeah, Gamer's Gauntlet. So that's, Blood Bowl, that was, the thing that Bishop brought to the store. He introduced that. And this is also the time of Magic the Gathering and Magic the Quest. So gaming was really starting to hit it big. And it was just another way to develop a customer base. Well, Morris got sick. And, Morris was diagnosed in January of 1998. So it was a rough 8-month period. I mean, he got diagnosed pretty much right around New Year's that year. And we didn't really see, when he was first diagnosed, everyone was nervous, but everyone was very hopeful. By that spring, by that March, by that April, it was terrible. He was on chemo, he was on steroids, and then by that summer, he wasn't even coming into the store anymore. And at that point, you just knew he was going to die. He was going to pass away. And in that regard, for anyone who has a tough thing to say about Bishop, I'll say this. I earn a lot of respect for him because he did a lot to make sure that Morris and Irene were as comfortable as they were in his last days. And he was a stand-up guy. He really, really was. I'm talking like when Morris was really sick towards the end, Bishop was the one carrying him up the stairs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he wasn't asked to do it. He was very happy to do it. He was very loyal. And he always had Irene's back. And he always had Morris's back. And he was very protective of them. That's the Bishop that I knew. And yes, he could come across as a little curt. Forgive me, it was a very emotional time. And maybe a little curt or maybe a little brusque, rather. I think that's the right word. Some people would say, wow, he's kind of like this menacing figure. Really good guy. Really good guy. You just, especially that's what I saw. He was very loyal. He was very protective of the business. And he gave a lot of his time and energy to make sure that the business thrived. And after, Morris died, he did a lot to keep Irene sane because it was very hard for her. Right. There were nights where she would break down crying. Well, Morris, why did you leave me? And so if things got too difficult for Irene, it was Bishop. And then by, when the lease ran out in January of 2007 at the 99 Court Street location, well, that's when they moved to the White Plains Mall. Right. And again, it was Bishop who was doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And, there were a lot of times before the store finally shut down in 2013 where Irene was absolutely, adamant. I'm shutting it down. I'm shutting it down. It was Bishop that kept the store going. It was Bishop that really pushed it really hard. And, for the customers that were consistently loyal to the store, he did it for them. Obviously, yes, he wanted to keep his job, but he really did a lot to make the store work. And for a lot of us, we were coming back because of Bishop. Even me. I mean, I'd been an employee there, but certainly the last 5 years, I wasn't working at the store. I was, it was a part of my family, but I was definitely there in the capacity of a customer. And it was Bishop that was making it work for us.
And I'm assuming that, among the regular clientele, yep. I mean, I'm sure they, were used to him, right? I mean, when you say
absolutely,
like, there were some people who might have been put off if he seemed short. I mean, I assume those were probably more, someone who just popped in as opposed to a regular customer, maybe?
No, I absolutely. I mean, look, part of it is, and I think you could appreciate this, Bishop had a shtick. He still has a shtick, right? He's the tough guy. He's the one that can be like the brooding guy, you know? And to a certain extent, it's a shtick that worked for him. Is it everyone's cup of tea? Certainly not. But at the same time, that's like, I would always joke that if I walked in and I saw Bishop with like this gleeful smile, that's what I'm going, like, what is this, the apocalypse? Like,
So, I mean, I guess that's the thing. I don't know that I would have ever, he didn't come across as short or anything like that, to me, but definitely serious.
Well, that's what I mean.
Right.
And if I said short, that's not what I meant. It was really, he could be gruff, serious, right. Not short, gruff.
Right. And especially
brooding.
especially watching that video. I mean, again, it was like very, very stern and serious. And I guess that's sort of the view. I mean, so I know you say it was a shtick. I mean, were there moments where that kind of came down and he was joking around, or was it
absolutely?
Yeah.
But you just had to know Bishop, because also part of the issue, part of the humor of the store, at least with all of us, was there was a lot of sarcasm there. It was a lot of dry humor, and I think that's really what sums up Bishop's sense of humor. It could be very dry. You just have to kind of, as I said, deadpan, and everything that I used to love about the store was also just how we all interacted with each other.
It sounds like we had similar experiences at our respective shops. And I don't think it's surprising because in both instances, mom and pop operation, single location as opposed to, like Dragon's Den, they had multiple stores, Heroes World, part of a chain.
Absolutely.
And in both cases, whether it's Odo, the owner at AR, or Bishop, the manager at Comic Book Heaven, these like iconic, larger than life characters. I mean, I feel like you see this a lot with retailers where, they have very distinct personalities.
Absolutely.
And people really, flock to them.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't say I flocked to Bishop, but I definitely, I certainly didn't flock to Bishop, but I will say that Bishop and I got along very well. And like I said, granted, I was a high school kid when I met him, but the one thing I've always respected about him was how loyal he was, how loyal he is. And in that regard, look, and I think you could appreciate this too, the benefit, at least of my experience in working with Morris and Irene, and even just the whole comic book industry, is ultimately your comic book shop is like home away from home, right?
Absolutely.
That's like, I would spend hours just hanging out at the store reading. I'd go find my little step, whether it was at Franklin Art or Comic Book Heaven, and just sit in the back and just read my books and chill out. And this is after I bought them, because I'd much rather read them there. And if I wanted to make a day of it, let me go pull this back issue, and let me go spend this, and let me go do that.
My Comic Shop History is sponsored in part by Acme Comics, the oldest and largest comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina. Acme is a full-service, multiple Eisner Award nominated business. Visit them when traveling or online now at acmecomics.com. And be sure to follow store manager Jermaine Exum on Twitter at Lord Retail, and tune in Tuesday evenings for his early new release comics reviews. One of our podcast sponsors is a family of film festivals: the Brightside Tavern Film Festival in Jersey City, the Point Lookout Film Festival on Long Island, and the Hang On to Your Shorts Film Festival in Asbury Park. Find them all on Film Freeway, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for information about dates, tickets, and film submissions. The Brightside Tavern Film Festival takes place the first weekend of August. Also, be sure to visit iTunes or ashareduniverse.com to tune into the official Hang On to Your Shorts podcast. One other thing with Bishop, he always seemed very candid, because anytime my mom would say to him, because she honestly would engage with him more than I would just be there with my list waiting for my comics. But if she would say, how are you, what's new? He was not shy about sharing whatever was going on in his personal life.
Yes, that's true.
Relationship drama, whatever it was, he didn't hold back, which is, again, very similar to Odo. People would come in and he, he was very free with his, personal life.
No, it's true. And that was actually part and parcel of the culture of Comic Book Heaven, But at the same time, it's also, it wouldn't have been Comic Book Heaven had you not had that dynamic. Bishop's coming in and someone asks, how are you doing? And then you're sitting there going, literally, whenever someone would ask that question, I'm scratching my head going, yeah, I'm just going to go in the back now. Yeah, I've already heard the answer to that question.
Yeah, were there a lot of repeated stories? Because that's a common thing I find with stores.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. There was a lot of repeated stories.
There's a show. I really, going back to whether it's the shtick or just this larger than life personality, whether it's something that they're actively cultivating or something that just develops organically. I really feel like there's that showmanship aspect of being a retailer, being in front of people, dealing with that many people.
It's very true.
And it's you catch the matinee performance and then the evening performance, right? You probably did. On a Wednesday, you had people there, I'm sure, when you open, and then the after work crowd, right? Well, there you go.
But the funny thing with it is, even with the performance aspect of it, look, and you know this with Odo better than I did. I'd walk in, talk to Steve, and next thing you know, we're talking about everything from his days practicing as an attorney to just, what books we're reading that we like, to how ridiculous the industry is, to, our next thing I'm sharing with Steve about a fight I had with my wife, and he's giving me relationship advice. Guess what?
I don't know if you want to take it from him. It's funny though that
That's a whole separate conversation, but yeah.
you got to him too late, or he got to you too late. You were already a practicing attorney by the time you started shopping there, because for years he really tried to deter me from going to law school. Yeah.
Well, actually, it's funny because I think you came up in the sense that he would say, "Oh yeah, there's another," because he referenced me a couple of times another customer of his that's going that had graduated from law school that he who he's and it, obviously now that I think about it, had to have been you.
The only other contender was Chris Block.
No, I think it was definitely you.
It was me.
Because,
all right.
Yeah, because at this point, now we're talking like 2014, and he said, "Oh yeah, he works." He said he went to Pace and he works there now. So obviously
that'd be me.
That'd definitely be you. But he'd sit there, and, at the time when I first started showing up to alternate realities. So Comic Book Heaven closes in 2013, and what was it? I was. At the time working with the Legal Aid Society, and he's like, "Oh, what kind of law do you practice?" "Criminal defense work." And we trade stories. And of course, he worked in the city doing like real estate and litigation. And he'd ask me how I liked it. And I'm like, "Don't ask." And then he said, of course, he'd tell me about you and, how he failed in getting you to not go the route of being a lawyer.
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah.
So it goes, you poor guy, you have one store close, you find alternate realities, you have, 2 years there before that shop closes.
And then I go to Modern Myths, and what happened? That shop closes.
Wow.
Well, it's funny, because before that I had 1 million comics. Like when I came to Westchester, my first store was 1 million comics. So I had 1 year, I had literally less than a year with 1 million comics. Then I had Comic Book Heaven. Well, Comic Alley.
You had a good
I had a
run.
great
You had a
run.
good run there.
That was 1994 to 2013. I mean, 19 years. And then after that, I had, 2013, 2015, 2 years at Alternate Realities. And then a couple of years at Modern Myths, 2015 to 2018, about 3 years. And then, since 2018, I've been over at Newbury Comics in the mall.
So going back to Comic Book Heaven, we've spoken a lot about at Alternate Realities, our Saturday night dinner gatherings. Did you guys do anything like that there? Did you go out with, amongst the staffers and or with the customers?
Yes, we did. But it wasn't like a regular thing. So one of the things we do movie nights.
Oh, that's cool.
So like we all saw, I kid you not, we all saw Interview with the Vampire together.
Okay.
We all saw Star Trek Generations together. First Contact, I was in college, but a lot of people went. So that was the stuff that like Morris and Irene would do.
That's cool.
And, we'd all get together, have dinner, go see a movie. And they were actually very big on organizing those events for like some of the customers and employees. And
I see a lot, because with all the stores that I've gone to, now I follow them on social media, and I see a lot of them will organize movie nights where they'll, rent out an entire theater for Captain Marvel or Endgame or whatever, and all the customers go, and I think it's a cool thing.
Yeah, no, and again, this is like pre-social media days. This is regular, like this is back in the days when, no one had a cell phone. Maybe some people had a beeper. Remember those? Beep 911.
I do.
Exactly. So for the most part, it was just like as old school as it got. You just did it word of mouth. And whenever we do these things, everyone would meet at the store. And you'd meet on a Friday night. Everyone would meet at the store, caravan out, maybe go grab dinner at a steakhouse, at a restaurant, and then boom, hit the movies.
That's nice.
But it was interesting. It wasn't just that. Like, Morris was a big jazz guy. He actually introduced me to a couple of jazz musicians. So, like, we did dinner, like, customers and staff did dinner, saw a jazz performance at the Terrytown Theater. Or, we saw Interview with the Vampire, Star Trek. I'm just thinking, again, this is the early 90s, so there was no really good comic book movie.
I know, very different time.
Oh, my God, yeah.
But it's cool to hear that you did stuff like that. Like I said, I was reflecting on, my memories of Comic Book Heaven, and, sad to say, I've already shared most of them. I don't have a ton. It was mostly those back issue quests that I remember the most. And I do remember, though, I got into reading Flash via Comic Book Heaven. I remember the new books, Wednesday's new releases used to be laid out on folding tables.
Yep.
Right? And I remember I wasn't a regular there, but I was there on a Wednesday, and I remember seeing Flash number 152 by Mark Waid. That was the start. This was post Chain Lightning, Wally West era. Post Chain Lightning, the start of the Dark Flash, the Walter West saga.
Yes.
And it was a very striking cover of this new Dark Flash. And it just caught my attention. It's one of those great moments of discovery where I hadn't read anything about it online or even in Wizard, I don't think. Like, I just saw the cover and I was like, oh, like, that's cool. And I picked it up and, been reading Flash ever since. And I got the back issues and everything. So I remember that. And I remember the Fox Spider-Man animated series from the 90s?
Yes.
That amazing line of toys that they did based on the show.
Well, that was actually right when
the store opened then, right?
Yeah, store opened in 94, because Spider-Man, the animated series, debuted the fall of 94.
Right.
And it was, and I can't believe I remember this, Christopher Barnes was the voice of Peter Parker.
Yeah. But they did a great line of figures, and I remember there was one that I was trying to track down, the Alien Spider Slayer.
Okay.
And I remember, I think I called the store. I can't remember if I called first or just went, but they had it. And I remember being in the store, being so excited to get that toy. And I think I even like Alien Spider Slayer. And that became within our family, a little bit of an inside joke. Whenever we were excited about something, it was oh, Alien Spider Slayer. So I have very fond memories of tracking that down. But those were two instances. And I remember one time when she shouldn't have done this, but I'm glad she did. I remember he sold me a copy of Ultimate Spider-Man the day before she was supposed to. It was a Tuesday, and the book released on Wednesday.
That's right, because they would get the preview books.
Yeah.
So this is back when they would do the early release.
Oh, actually, you know what? Let me take it back, because I was thinking about, now retailers get the books on Tuesday. But yeah, you're right. I think those were the preview copies that they would get the week before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what she must have done is sold you one of the preview copies.
Yeah.
And it was the only copy, but knowing that it would be replaced the next day. Yeah.
So, but I remember, being very excited to get that. But again, there's small moments, but it was always exciting to go to Comic Book Heaven.
Yep.
You guys had so much stuff. The racks of new comics were deep. And, again, you had pretty much any back issue, especially the recent stuff, which was the stuff that I was, tracking down. So I always had a good time. I know Irene would have her dogs at the store.
Yes.
One or multiple?
There were two.
Okay.
So she had...
We have some very excited neighbors in the hall here.
Yeah, clearly. So the first dog she got was a rescue after Morris died. It was a mutt. Great dog. Clark Kent. That's what she
Clark,
named.
yes.
Yes, Clark. She called it Clark short for Clark Kent, and she loved that dog. And her mom, Betty, also had a dog. I think it was a little spaniel. I forget the dog's name. And then Clark ultimately, passed. She got another dog. I think it was Elliot. Yeah, she definitely had her, series of dogs.
So, that's, very nice. And now I'm going to sound like a jerk. It wasn't my favorite thing in the world that the dogs were in the store. Keep in mind, though, I had much more of that collector mindset at the time, and I guess my fear was I got dogs in the store, I got to protect the books. Because I do, I like dogs, and even more so now through my wife. At the time, I was, I guess less of an animal lover, but it wasn't my favorite thing. And even at AR towards the final year, Steve started bringing, his dog to the store, and again, wasn't my favorite thing. How did you feel about the dogs in the store?
It didn't bother me.
No, all right.
Well, and it's funny because the reason it didn't bother me was I also, my perspective on it was very different. Look, if I'm a customer coming in strictly looking at it from a purist perspective, the last thing that I'm focusing on, or the last thing I want rather, is, oh my God, what are these dogs doing there? Something could happen to the books. But by that same token, this was my home away from home. And, Morris and Irene's store. And for Irene, the reason she had the dogs was that's how she dealt with not having Morris around in a lot of ways. And so they just became part of the family of the store. It got to a point, let's say by 1999, at this point it's, within a year of Morris's death, but Clark was a fixture at the store, and you knew that you were going to see that dog there.
Right.
And he was a great dog, to be quite honest. He didn't bark, didn't yell, very loyal. He just slept there, and he was just a very, very good dog.
For the record, it was more just the idea of pets in the store. I had nothing against those particular
Of course
ones.
not. I know. I get that. I get that. No, absolutely. It's like, what are we doing? It's a store. But yeah, but you said it yourself. By the end, Steve was bringing his dog.
But I mean, like when you made the switch over to AR, just in terms of the atmosphere, did it feel comparable to what you had experienced at Comic Book
no
Heaven?
question.
Yeah.
I mean, well, that's the thing. What I found was, look, Steve was the permanent fixture. He wasn't going anywhere. But Steve was very straightforward, very easy to talk to. He knew the business. And, a lot of the culture of AR, at least from my perspective, was similar to the culture of Comic Book Heaven. It's a comic book store. And I say that and what I mean by that actually is this, just that, like, it took my wife a while to understand what a comic book store is really like. She would go, well, it's just a place where, like, what comic books are sold. And I'm like, silly girl. No. That is not how that works. It's like a home away from home. It's an escape. It's a haven. And it was, well, a heaven, certainly. My comic, that was the play on it. Comic Book Heaven was actually M.I., Morris and Irene, my comic book heaven.
And that was on the sign, right?
Yeah.
I never noticed that.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't.
Ever. Like, I think it was only, when we started talking in advance of this that I even realized.
Yeah.
Great name, though, Comic Book Heaven.
Yeah.
We've talked about the challenges posed by alternate realities.
Yeah.
Not having comics in the name, people mistakenly calling it alternate realties, thinking we're a real estate agent. Like, there were a lot. Comic Book Heaven, boom, gets you right there.
Well, that was the thing, and that was the shortened version. The original name was My Comic Book Heaven, and and it was spelled M.I., Morris and Irene. So the original sign after they moved into the location, it was M.I. Comic Book Heaven, Morris and Irene, My Comic Book Heaven.
I dig. My comic shop history, I dig that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not to bring it down, but when Morris and then Irene passed, I assume you were present for memorial service. Did a lot of the customers come out for that?
Well, it's funny. I was actually in college for Morris's funeral service, so I wasn't able to come down. And I wound up, coming back. It wasn't until Thanksgiving I was actually able to come back and pay respects directly. But yes, customers were there for his passing, for his service. And, when Irene died, we had a lot of old customers that came in for that funeral. And at that point, Bishop was there, Ricky was there, I was there. Her brothers had organized this services, and it was actually at a funeral home in the Bronx. And there were people out there I hadn't seen in years. It was very emotional.
Yeah, no,
Extremely emotional.
I can imagine. I think that really says a lot to what, the store, but more importantly, what Morris and Irene meant to those customers. And, you've been describing it as a home away from home. It really is that, and it becomes this surrogate family.
Absolutely.
So if, we'll bring it back up now. So, if it's a family, who's Bishop to you? Like older brother, cousin?
Yeah.
Uncle?
Well, I would, you ever see The Wonder Years?
Yeah.
Okay. So in a lot of ways, he's like Wayne, the big brother.
Yeah.
But like, the demented older brother, kind of torture you a little bit.
Okay.
Look, it's funny. I'll say that, much of the drama of the store came from the relationship drama that all of the employees went through. All of us. Like, Heck, I had my first big breakup with a girlfriend right when I was working at the store when I was home from college.
So not drama between each other, but like drama in each of your personal lives. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's funny because Bishop was one of the people that counseled me through that breakup. And I was like 18 years old, first really serious girlfriend. It was, home from college and boom, boom, boom. And like, I broke up with her, but it was like, oh, when you're 18 years old, your girlfriend cheats on you. Oh my God, it's the most
End of the
devastating
world.
end of the world. But it was Bishop is one of the people that really counseled me through that, and that's the kind of stuff that I remember. So yeah, he was, if Morris was the father, Irene was the mother, Bishop was like that older brother that on the one hand will have your back and take care of you and give you some great advice. But when you're not looking, he's going to give you like an atomic wedgie. So, and then point his finger at your chest, you look down, and then smacks you upside the head and screams, make you look.
Right.
Like that's the way Bishop was. and bear in mind, I was a high school kid, but I suppose in many ways toughened me up for a lot of things. But, very, like I said, he was very loyal. He's one of my favorite coworkers that I've ever had.
I want to make sure we touch on the final days at the White Plains Mall. So we mentioned, it used to be across from the Galleria, which is one caliber of mall in White Plains. You currently shop at the Westchester, the highest end mall experience. Yeah. So we have the Westchester, we have the Galleria, and then, we
have the White Plains Mall.
We don't want to put anything down, but the White Plains Mall has seen better days.
Yeah, and that goes back like 50 years, certainly. It's seen better days.
So that was Comic Book Heaven's final home. So again, I was never there, but what I heard, much smaller space.
Well, so a couple of things. What ultimately would happen was when Morris and Irene moved to the Court Street location, it was for a 10-year lease. The lease expired, and the lease expired in January of 2007. So when the lease was up for renewal, the landlord tripled the rent. And, just to kind of give a little bit of backstory, at this point in time, White Plains was experiencing a bit of a development renaissance. So they had just put up the Trump development, and the movie theater had been built, and the movie theater was operational as of January 2004. So this is 2003 into 2004. So at this point, it's been 3 years. We've had a movie theater. We've had the Trump development. And people are thinking, okay, let's look at more development in White Plains. So they were built, at this point in time, the Ritz-Carlton was actually under construction. So the landlord felt that given this proliferation of development, this was hot property. Triples the rent, at which point Irene couldn't afford it. So she shopped around and she found a store space in the White Plains Mall. But it was like a fraction of the size of the Court Street location.
And the Court, just to interrupt for a quick second, so that Court Street location, I just drove by the other day. It's a CVS now?
No.
It's not. It's what? Okay.
So...
Because I wasn't positive exactly which one it was. So
it's next to the CVS.
Okay. Is it vacant? Or is there
It's still vacant. That one space is actually still vacant. What happens is every year, they will have a temporary lease for a costume shop.
One of those Halloween pop-up shops?
Yeah, for a Halloween pop-up shop, at least for a few years. But what Irene did back in 2006, 2007 was she couldn't liquidate that much inventory. She actually wound up placing a lot of it in storage, and then took the space at the White Plains Mall.
Okay.
And the store, obviously, all the current file customers went over. And yeah, that was the home for the store for the next 6 years, from actually almost 7 years. It was a much smaller space, but Irene was able to make it work. And she was able to make it work because she had Bishop. I mean, to be quite honest with you, he was the one keeping the store going.
And so now, again, this is something that I'm curious to hear about. What we had heard was that, and maybe this pertains to the books in storage. I don't know if it was the storage or at the store, but they were ruined by water damage. That sprinklers went off.
That was in storage.
Okay.
A lot of the books in storage were ruined.
Those were like the back issues?
Yeah, a lot of the back issues. A lot of the back issues were destroyed, because of certain things that happened in the storage unit.
That's just...
yeah.
Was that the fatal blow, or were there other factors too?
I think, so essentially what had been going on was, towards the last few years, before Irene closed the store, and God bless that woman, she had experienced a lot of loss in the last 15 to 20 years of her life. I mean, her husband got sick and he passed away. She had this dog that she was extremely devoted to, in part because it was what was helping her process Morris's death. And Clark died. She euthanized. Had to put him to sleep. And then, she had she had her sister who wound up passing away from cancer. And then she had an elderly mother, Betty, who also wound up passing away. So, for her, it was just loss after loss after loss. And with respect to the store, one of the things that, that even I used to say to her, and Bishop and I would talk about this, was the store was something that we felt was keeping her functional, keeping her alive, keeping her healthy, just because A, was getting her out of the house, and B, it was giving her something to do every day. For a few years after Morris died, she was in as good of a place as she could be, without her husband. She was working out, she was exercising, she was taking care of herself, she was socializing, she was having, organizing events like for the customers and the staff, like whether it's a movie or a few people, maybe going out to dinner, just things like that. Towards the last couple of years, she was just having, I think, a tough time just with the business. And of course, this from your time working in a comic book shop, like anything else, there are peaks and valleys. It goes up and down with how the business flows. So, I think 2013, 2012, and this is not a reflection of the business that they were running, but more a reflection of the business of the industry at the time. There was a lot of ups and downs. I mean, how many times are customers going to be psyched about, DC Comics, like resetting continuity? So with the downturns in the business and, her personal life, then ultimately what happened was the day that the store shut down, Diamond had changed their policy, how they were accepting payment for the books. And Irene just got frustrated and said, that's it, we're done. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not doing this. And literally, I remember I walked into the store like any other Wednesday.
Right, because you weren't working there anymore, obviously, but it was still your regular shop.
Exactly.
Right.
I just walked into the store during my lunch break. It was actually at Legal Aid, and Legal Aid office used to be on North Broadway in White Plains, North Broadway, on the corner of Main Street and North Broadway. So walking to the White Plains Mall is real easy. I used to love it. I'm like, oh, great. I didn't have to worry about parking.
Oh, man, you're good to go.
It was great. I had a garage spot from Legal Aid that I didn't have to pay for. All the employees parked for free. The office paid for it. So I'd be able to walk to my comic book shop. I didn't even have to worry about a parking ticket or anything. It was awesome. So what happens? I show up and there's Bishop. And in the most deadpan way, we have no books. We're closing the store. And
it was that abrupt.
It was that abrupt. We have
no
books.
So it was like, so they changed their payment policy and she was just like, okay, like I'm
done.
Was it that they weren't extending credit anymore? Like you had to pay as soon as
I mean, it was cash on delivery. They weren't doing credit, and she'd been operating on credit and for years. It wasn't like she wasn't behind. I mean, yeah, like anything else, maybe a little bit, once or twice, but catch up. But she consistently, and she was not willing to do it. She said, no, that's it.
And then how long after that before the store was shut down?
3 days.
3 days?
It was the end of the week.
It's, so again, something that else that we have in common is we're both part of stores that closed after a very long tenure. But, with AR, it was really more of a long goodbye. I mean, Steve made the announcement in February, the store closed in June. So there was time to kind of mourn and process and spread the word.
Absolutely.
Sounds like you did not have that.
Not even a little bit.
I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of customers then who showed up, a few days after that for their books. I talked about this in the season premiere. I mean, that was what happened to me with Heroes World. That was my regular store. I was averaging every other week. So I went in, 2 weeks later, the store was gone. Had no idea. It was traumatizing as a kid.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was like. I mean, look, I wasn't a kid. I was a 35-year-old grown-ass man. And I'm walking in, and all of a sudden it's closing. And for me, it was tough to deal with because it wasn't like she was going anywhere else. She was done.
Right. Was there any talk of Bishop buying it?
We'd actually kind of talked about it, where maybe a bunch of us maybe invest to it. And it didn't, part of the problem was, let's say if you're talking about a time frame like alternate realities, okay, that's a 4-month-long goodbye. You at least have time to have a conversation. How do you do that in the span of like 3 days or 4 days?
What'd you do with everything?
I mean, so basically no new books. They were closing the store. She tried to liquidate everything. I think it wasn't maybe not as abrupt as 3 days. Maybe it was like 5 or 10. I think they were good. They had the rent paid until the end of the month, but this was like in the middle of the month. So it was just liquidate everything they can, put the rest into storage, and shut it down. But
that's I had.
It was definitely. It's like I almost felt like the store ghosted us. Like it's just poof, like very little, explanation. Then boom, the store's gone.
That's, I mean, again, I'm so struck by that because I'm thinking about what I would. I mean, again, I had the Heroes World experience, but I wasn't nearly as involved with that store as you were with this, or as I was with alternate realities.
But it was also for such an extended period of time. I mean, think of it this way: I was 15 years old. I mean, this place had been a part of my life for 20 years.
I mean, it was a long-standing Westchester comic shop institution.
Yeah, it's true. It at that point had become an institution.
That's really sad. I really didn't know that aspect of it. I mean, that's really unfortunate. I mean, I guess how quickly do you run through the stages of grief in a situation like that? I mean,
you can't even process it, really.
So, I mean, I guess, leading up to that, I mean, again, it sounds like Diamond's change in policy was really like the precipitating event with that. But with, again, everything that she had been going through, I mean, had she been talking about closing? Because, again, with Odo, it was like, for as long as we knew him, he was like, once the lease is up, I'm not going to renew. And then he would renew. But it was this ever-present threat that he was going to close. So when he finally
the last few years, it was also an ever-present threat with her.
Okay.
The thing is, though, we were a little bit more guarded that maybe she'll do it, especially because of all the loss she'd endured. But she hadn't been. Whereas I think in this instance, from her perspective, because the way the business was going between everything else, and then finally, oh my God, now I have to come up with like X amount of money. That's it. I'm done. And look, part of it also was, like any other comic book store, it operates in cycles. Point is, comic books weren't as lucrative at this point.
Believe me, you don't have to tell me about the challenges of running the store, man. Yeah. I get it. And, that compounded by what she was going through in her personal life. And so then that was it.
That was it. And it was over. I mean, poof, it was gone. I think hardest part was, I remember that day, and this is, it was an end of an era, and I couldn't even process it. Like, I actually said to myself, I got to give it let's wait a few days and see if Irene
changes her mind.
Exactly. And I spoke with Bishop, and I spoke with her, and I spoke with him. It wasn't happening. And so it was a goodbye that was so forced and so rushed that I never really had a chance to properly say goodbye to Irene and the store. And then sadly, a little over 3 years later, she was dead. She passed away. It was very bittersweet.
It was a sad end, I guess, for the store, and for her. But,
absolutely.
I mean, clearly, she and Morris and Bishop and the store, obviously made an impression on you. We're that family and that,
Absolutely.
that place to go, that second home. And, that's a wonderful thing. And, I love hearing about that. And, again, for me, I always knew the experience that I had, but it's encouraging to, to know that those things, were going on and continue to go on at other comic shops.
Yeah.
I think that really speaks to, the power of the comic shop. I've really, this has been, very enjoyable and insightful, and I've enjoyed, getting to hear about your experience with Comic Book Heaven and learn more about the store and kind of fill in the gaps from my own knowledge about it as a kid. As we wrap up here, is there anything else that you wanted to say about the store or your experience? What you hope the legacy of Comic Book Heaven in Westchester is, maybe?
Well, here's what I'll say about the store and certainly its significance to me. I always joke, when people ask me, especially now that I've been a practicing attorney for over a decade now, they're like, oh, what's your favorite job? And I always go back to Comic Book Heaven. I said, my favorite job was working in a comic book frame shop, framing pictures and filing away issues of like Ultraverse comic books, and they'll look at me like, what? I said, because it was one of my favorite times of my life.
Well, I thank you very much for sharing your comic shop history with me and with listeners. Thank you for being part of this. Just a quick postscript to the episode you just heard. Originally, I was planning to record a second episode on Comic Book Heaven featuring former manager Bishop Purvis. In fact, I was scheduled to record with Bishop just a couple of days after my conversation with Saad. We were going to meet at Gamers Gauntlet, the store where Bishop was working. Believe it or not, as soon as I was done recording with Saad, I checked my phone and found that I had a text message from Bishop informing me that our recording was off, that he was no longer working at Gamers Gauntlet. I did reach out and offer to meet him elsewhere so that we could still do the recording, even if it wasn't at his now former store. And unfortunately, I haven't heard back from Bishop. So, alas, there will not be a second episode about Comic Book Heaven featuring Bishop. That being said, I really love the episode that I did with Saad. I think he really painted a full picture of Bishop and Morris and Irene and the entire Comic Book Heaven store and community. I hope you enjoyed as well. For more with Saad, be sure to head on over to the My Comic Shop History Patreon page and listen to the after show. And then, of course, we will be back with an all-new episode of My Comic Shop History featuring American legends formerly known as One If by Cards, Two If by Comics in 2 weeks. Until then, don't be a flat squirrel. If you like what you hear, please consider joining the My Comic Shop History Patreon page. I know we're all subscribed to a million different services these days, but your Patreon support helps me cover the costs associated with maintaining the podcast. Plus, you get access to a ton of exclusive bonus content, starting at the $1 level, including the My Comic Shop Book Club, Beyond My Comic Shop, and My Superfan History subseries. If you enjoy the regular episodes, I promise you'll dig the Patreon ones. Thanks to everyone who has already signed up.